I'm up by 6 o'clock every morning. I hear the 6:30 news and then the 6:40 farming news. I like to hear that every morning, and then I come down here to start the men for the day at 7. Morning. Mick, you can take Charlie down to Clifton once he gets done. Should be done by dinner time. And Michael, you can finish them silos. Fill them up, what have you. And I believe it's payday once again, so I shall need your timesheets. I'm usually out and about till 8 or 9, and then once a week I go into the bank to draw the wage money. Good morning, Mr. Grindley. Morning.
Hello, Ted.
Good morning, Jack.
How are things?
Very well, thank you.
How's Margaret?
Very well.
Children?
Yes, thank you. I think Margaret will be in sometime during the week.
Good, good. Incidentally, I've just had a copy of your latest figures. It looks as though you'll be up to your profit target this year.
We hope so. I've been meaning to have a talk about that, actually. I reckon this trip to the bank has become a sort of ritual. I should miss it if I couldn't come. I like to have a natter about how things are going. I've always been fascinated with money. You know, what this money can do. How should it be used? I mean, whether we like it or not, it's money that makes the world tick. The stage got through again.
Followed by showers. South wind becoming strong and veering west or northwest. Normal temperatures for the time of year. The forecast for North Wales, northwest England and the Lake District, including Cumberland and West.
Good old Cumberland.
Scattered showers this morning.
10 years ago, Father and I used to farm up there. I still miss the Cumberland countryside. It's really beautiful. After all, I was born up there, I learned my farming there, I met my wife there, and got married. (1676) the farmhouse at Leesrigg dates from. Father and I farmed 227 acres there. The land around Leesrigg is heavy land. It's hilly, wooded, and broken up by little streams. The fields are small with big hedges. It's beautiful to look at, and in Cumberland they grow some of the best grass and root crops in the country. Milk, dairying, was the most important part of our farming, but we did keep a few sheep. We grew oats, a little wheat as well. A few potatoes for ourselves, swedes and kale for the sheep and cows. The crops weren't cash crops as such, they were mostly grown for the livestock we had. I went into partnership with Father when I married. That was in 1947. He gave me a half share in the farming of Leesrigg. That was when I opened my first bank account too. £50. But by about 1950 I was able to take over Father's half share as well and pay him a rent for the land. And yet I wasn't really satisfied. I'm very ambitious, I suppose. I like to feel I'm getting somewhere. I was doing well with my dairy herd, but what I really wanted was to get into large-scale arable farming. And then, in 1954, Father decided to retire. Right, I said, this is our chance to sell and move. Find a bigger farm. Try something new.
It was all done rather on the spur of the moment. I remember Ted coming into the kitchen and saying, "Oh, Father and I have decided to sell and move." I said, "What? Not leave Cumberland?"
What I really hoped was that we might be able to find what we wanted in Cumberland. You can get that kind of farm up there, but we hunted and hunted. There just wasn't anything on the market. So we came south. We started looking in January 1954. We finally found this place, Nook Farm near Huntingdon. Bought it in June and moved here in October. 885 acres at about £55 an acre. Now, 10 years later, it must be worth nearly 3 times that. It's heavy land here, ideal for wheat and barley, and for grass. It's open, it's flat. We have about the lowest rainfall in the country. In fact, it's just what we wanted, a complete change. When we're harvesting, I do a spell on each machine in turn so that the men can get their lunch without things coming to a standstill. Sign of the times. I rather like it, having them go over. Mind you, it wasn't like this when we moved here. There were hedges everywhere. The ditches were blocked. Consequently, the land was waterlogged. But nevertheless, it felt right. I knew we could do something with it. We had the place surveyed, of course. And we got in touch with the local NAS people, who were very helpful. They advised us on what they thought the land was capable of, and so on. We had about £26,000 after selling the farms in Cumberland. Credit was pretty tight at that time, but we managed to get a mortgage of £27,000, which I partially covered with a life insurance, just in case anything should happen to me. I shifted my bank account, of course, to the nearest branch of the Midland, which was at St Neots.
I was working at the St Neots branch then, and I was the first person there to deal with him and his father. I suppose my first impression of Ted Grindley was that he'd been brought up to farm in the right way. We were very happy about that, and also that his father was going to have a bungalow there and keep an eye on things.
We asked for a £10,000 overdraft to run the farm for the first year. We hadn't worked the figure out, we just thought of a number, really. Actually, they agreed to 8, and did the same again the next year. And that was it. I had a big farm, a few £1,000s in the bank, and my herd of 80 pedigree Friesians that I brought down from Cumberland. They were terribly important to us, because not having much money, it was vital to have the milk check coming in each month, to have some regular income. When we arrived at Nook Farm in 1954, there were 320 acres of wheat, 160 of barley, 80 of oats. There were 30-odd acres of peas, 50 or 60 of sugar beet, 38 acres of potatoes, a few mangels, and about 200 acres of pasture that weren't really doing anything. There were 33 men on the payroll when I got there, but I lightened the ship a bit by reducing the labour force to 11. You see, I was absolutely determined to start off on the right foot, to get rid of all the rubbish. The important thing was to get the land ticking again as quickly as possible. We managed to salvage what was already there, just got the sugar beet lifted in time. I drove it to the factory myself on New Year's Day. We must have been the last people in the country, I should think. Money was our big worry. We came down with £4,000 in cash, and the first week we spent more than that on machinery alone. We ought to work the whole thing out on paper, how to get the best out of the money we had. Still, you live and learn. Anyway, we survived that first year and went on slowly improving the place, opening it out. We tried to get all the fields up to 30 or 40 acres by pushing out the hedges, We cleared the ditches, put in tile drains, and subsoiled as much of the land as we could. Subsoiling. That's cracking the hard clay under the topsoil so that the land can drain properly. That's the big snag with the land here. We have to do it every 4 years. This was supposed to be very hard land to farm because of that. In fact, when we first came here, I heard later, the local people were saying they'd give us 6 months and then we'd pack it in. As we got the feel of things and enlarged the fields, we simplified the cropping as well, so we were moving in the right direction. But we were in this state, that until we had more money, we couldn't really start to make money. For instance, corn. If you've no capital, you have to sell it straight off the combines just to live. Whereas, if you have enough capital, you can store it and hold back until the price is good, and then sell. Last year I made £3 a tonne more on my wheat than if I'd sold it straight off. On 600 odd tonnes a week, that's nearly £2,000. Or take fertiliser. Because I can pay on the nail now, I can get bigger discount on bulk orders. I reckon the discount on the fertiliser orders saves me enough to pay one man's wages every year. It's essential to have access to credit if you're going to function efficiently. Anyway, going back to 1956, we decided to form a limited company, and at the same time we changed to local accountants because we really had to have people who knew the district well. And also, I suppose, because I felt I had to do something drastic. I was quite desperate, really. I couldn't sleep. My overdraft was going up. We were getting rather ambitious. We knew we could handle more cows, but we hadn't got the money to buy them. It was terrible, this feeling of not being able to get things moving. It was really getting me down. The accountant said, "Where are your figures? No use trying to borrow money unless you have figures to back you up." So then we started. We beat out a proper scheme for our expenditure, exactly what we wanted the money for, what it would do for us. But we could see that the way to convince the bank manager was to get him out here and show him round, go over the whole thing on the ground. And that's what we did. The result was that the bank agreed to increase our overdraft limit substantially. Then, in 1958, the Midland Bank opened a branch at Huntingdon, which is much nearer than St Neots, and we transferred our account there.
I was brought in to open the new branch. Ted Grindley was my first customer. His overdraft limit was increased by another £1,000, and in the following year he sold his Frisian herd.
We'd had a couple of good years, but I knew that cows weren't bringing in the profit they should. We were using the original cowshed that was here when we arrived, which was obsolete, and it meant we were employing 5 men to look after 80 cows.
At 70 guineas, who's speaking? At 75 guineas, try once more, 8 to 2. At 70, well, a bit of 2, 72, 5 and a 5. At 75 against two in front, 5 and you're out below. The last time at number 92.
Anyway, we got an average of 130 guineas for each animal, and that really gave us some cash of our own at last. Really set us going. We turned over completely to arable farming. We ploughed up all the pasture land, and that gave us wonderful crops of corn, of course. We had 2 very good years indeed. Even so, what was happening at that time was that I was having to spend more and more time in the office on costings and so on. And then that year, 1960, I was at the Peterborough show. I got talking to a seed rep, and I was saying, I wish I had somebody to do all that side of it for me. And he said, "Well, if you're prepared to pay for it, I know someone who started a firm that does just that. Would you like to meet him?" In fact, about a week later, this chappie from the farm consultants came over, and I showed him round the farm. We had a long talk, and the upshot of it was that they would study the farm and prepare a scheme showing how the profitability could be improved. They came back with a scheme, and they said, you must go back into milk and concentrate entirely on milk, wheat and barley. And you must have a completely new streamlined setup for milking, new buildings, everything. I said, that's fine. What am I supposed to use for money? We needed about £8,000 just for the buildings. I was quite scared. But they said, now that's all right. We'll put up a scheme for the bank, and we're sure they'll back you. And they did.
We're always happy to see our customers taking expert advice, either from the NAS or from outside farm consultants. And we always try and encourage them to do that.
I must say, though, when you've got quite a decent profit coming in anyway, it takes a lot of confidence to tear the place apart and change it all. But I've always believed if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing properly. What we had originally was a double cow shed with a centre walk and 2 feeding passages on each side. We gutted the whole thing and quartered it, making a collecting area, a feed store, and a new herringbone milking parlour. The whole object of the exercise was to streamline the milking operation, get the cows through as quickly as possible. We built a big working trench for the dairymen so that they can get at the cows easily to clean and milk them. There's music to keep the cows happy. And we put in automatic feeding hoppers down each side of the parlour. All this means that where we once had 5 men looking after 80 cows, now we have 2 men looking after 140. It's the same with the dairy. The whole thing is automated. The washing, the sterilising, it's all electrically timed. Quite by chance, the milk board send all our milk to the American Air Force Base across the road. It's the only milk produced in the district which conforms to their particular standards of hygiene. After we'd streamlined the milking setup, we started on the farmyard. We cleared everything out and built this big double building. We can store 1,000 ton of silage in there with an electric fence round it so that the cattle can feed themselves. The dairymen don't carry any food at all. They don't move anything but bedding. The bedding straw is stored on top of the silage to make the best use of the building. We also extended the grain store to hold 900 tons and adapted the dryer to increase the throughput. It all took a lot of courage, as I say, because it was all theoretical, really. It was all a gamble, as far as I was concerned. But really, it's a marvellous service these farm consultants give me. They carry out a monthly inspection. I get a 3-monthly balance sheet, a 6-monthly one, and a 12-monthly one, with the year ending in September. They do a budget at the start of the year and a quarterly cash forecast. We have everything down, what we should have spent and made, what we've in fact spent and made, the position at the bank, everything. We know exactly how much it costs to produce a gallon of milk and why. It's the only way, really, if you're producing a commodity to sell. You must know the economics of producing it.
I was very happy with the way things were going. In early 1961, the company had a sizable credit balance. And then, later in the year, the adjoining farm, Waterloo Farm, came up for sale. Because it was adjoining, it was worth more to Ted, of course, than anyone else. It enabled him to spread his fixed costs more effectively.
It was 257 acres in a pretty rough state. I bought it privately. My overall picture was much sounder then, of course, so the bank felt able to help me again. Then we simply tore the place apart. This shows how we simplified the cropping. So now we have nothing but wheat, barley and cattle here. The aim at both farms was to be completely self-supporting, try and use as much homegrown stuff as we could, making silage instead of hay, and so on. Mind you, it wasn't all plain sailing. I've had my share of bad luck, stack fires and so on. I remember once I had 110 acres of potatoes down by the river. There was a terrific storm one night. The river flooded and I lost the lot a week before they were due to be lifted. 4,000 quid that cost us. So you see, I've made mistakes, but I'm sure I'm a better farmer because of what they've taught me. Then, in 1963, I heard of a farm for sale down at Clifton, near Biggleswade, 20 miles away, in what's really market garden country. I'd always wanted to farm on a lighter soil, which is what this was. So I saw it and finally decided to buy it, if I could. One of the big attractions of the farm was that the River Ivel flows through it, and there was a concession attached to the lease that allows us to draw 350,000 gallons of water a day for irrigating the farm. That's a godsend, it really is.
By this time, Ted had really proved himself. He had shown that he could farm well, make and conserve profits, so that his capital was increasing all the time. This meant that he had been able to keep any repayment arrangements he had made with us, and so we were very happy to agree when he asked us to help him buy this latest farm.
I was going to put in another dairy there, but we went into it, working it all out on paper, and found it wouldn't be sufficiently profitable to justify the expense. So we ploughed the whole place up and knocked the old buildings down. We've put in a big new storage barn, and we've gone in for corn, sugar beet, and early potatoes. The whole place is worked by a manager and 2 men. We have about 1,500 acres now altogether. My ambition's always been to farm 3,000. When we get another piece of land, I'd like to try something different. Growing peas, for instance, for freezing, something like that. Specialization, that's the secret of success. This shows our overall increase in output in relation to labor costs, and this our profit. At first they didn't pick up as fast as I'd hoped when the new scheme came into operation, but once we really got underway, well, we're coming very close to our target profit now. Now that things are going pretty smoothly, I've taken on an assistant to look after things when I'm not around. This chappie used to be in an accountant's office before he went to an agricultural college. That's the perfect background. The kind of education I missed. Having somebody like that who can keep an eye on things for me means that lately we've been able to get right away for our holidays, really cut ourselves off.
In the old days, it was awful. When we were away, he'd ring up home every night, and if there was anything wrong, we'd just pack up our bags and go straight home. But now we've been to Mallorca, Gibraltar, Madeira. I've still got some travellers' cheques, actually, that I've been meaning to pay back ever since we got home.
Hello, Margaret. Do come in.
I've come about those shares. I've talked it over with...
I even have time nowadays to go and watch cricket. I really enjoy a good day's cricket. What's more important is that I have more time now to spend with the children when they're on holiday. John, the eldest, came onto the farm when he left school. Later, he'll do a course in management. Then, when we expand, he'll be ideally suited to look after one of the farms. Robert wants to be a scientist. He isn't interested in farming at all. I'd like him to go on to a university. And Janet, she's at boarding school too, then she'll go to a domestic science college. All the children have had savings accounts for quite a while. I think it's very important, actually. They've got to learn about money for themselves, and I want them to get used to going to the Midland, feel at ease there. They'll all have shares in the company in time, but they must earn their own living. I think that's essential. The other great thing about having this assistant is that at last I can sit back and take a fairly objective view of things. But at the same time, in this business, once you start to stand still, you can be pretty sure you're going backwards. I try to go to as many farming demonstrations, conferences and meetings as I can. There's always something to be seen. I subscribe to the Royal Show, the NIAB at Cambridge, the NFU, of course, and the NIAE at Silsoe. I do all that by banker's order. I don't know what I'd do without them for paying things like that. We've put in cricket bat willows along the ditches and roadside at Nook Farm. We grow them under contract. I think they look rather nice in the spring and summer. It makes up for having pulled all the hedges out. But they're profitable as well. They're not just decoration. I think that's important. We've got to realise that farming isn't a privileged thing anymore. Once we had to grow all our own food. Couldn't be brought in from abroad. But now that potatoes, say, can be flown in from the Canaries, farmers aren't just competing with one another, they're competing with other industries. We're competing for the use of land and the use of labour. And above all, we're competing for the use of credit. We must have access to credit, and to get that, we must show we know how to use it. Farming is a business. And if farmers are to survive, they must run things in a business-like way. After all, there are times when even the bank itself is short of money to lend, and it's in times like these that farmers who've shown they can farm efficiently and profitably come off best. It's as simple as this. Whether you're big or small, a farmer who isn't a businessman is a farmer who isn't a farmer. If you don't understand money, you don't understand farming. Farming is this and this.